Oh, hello. Don't look at that yet. Don't look at that yet. Good morning, everybody. And welcome to the highlight of civilization. That's right. You made it again, and it will be glorious today. Well, we all woke up to some, let's say, a plot twist. Plot twist. We'll talk about that and all the things. But before we get to the obvious news of the day about the Supreme Court, how would you like to take your experience up to, I don't know, levels that have never been seen in the history of humanity? I think you would. Why wouldn't you, really? And all you need is a cup or mug or a glass, a tankard, Chalice or stein, a canteen, jug or flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine of the day. The thing that's going to make everything amazing, especially this live stream, is called the simultaneous sip. Go. Now, if you're using a tankard, as opposed to a cup or a mug or a stein, make sure it's not one of those Russian tankards, because I hear they blow up really easily. Well, because I know you're all here to talk about the Supreme Court leak, I'm going to start with something else just to make sure everybody's found us. There's a cool story about a startup called Cosmic that creates these little prefab homes that they make the parts so that they lay flat on a flatbed truck so they're easy to transport. And then you get there and you slap it together. It comes with its own solar battery and solar power. And the entire thing is completely energy self-sufficient. It still has to connect to the plumbing and sewer. But otherwise, you just ship it in, slap it together, everything's ready to go. And you do a little assembling on plant, but you don't even need a big crane. Now, is this company in this particular home going to be the thing that changes everything? Well, who knows? But one thing I can say for sure is that however well we could make a kit home in the 50s, because remember, I think Sears made homes you could make yourself. But I think they mostly just sent you the wood and the nails and said, here's some instructions on how to put this together, essentially. Whereas the new stuff, imagine modern engineering. So in the factory is basically robots, right? So the robots will assemble it in the factory. It fits neatly on trucks, and then it's easy to assemble in the field. This is by far, I think, between robots, I guess it'd be a toss-up between robots and self-driving cars and these little prefab homes. I think those are going to be three of the biggest industries in the future. And I don't know what would stop them. Those are things which you can see coming pretty clearly. I mean, self-driving cars, that's guaranteed someday. And these prefab kit homes that are made in factories by robots, pretty much guaranteed, because the economics of it will be insane. All right. So that's the good news. I think housing will be fixed. And I always thought that walls should be made of mostly glass. And it looks like these prefab things have mostly glass walls, but they use this really thick glass so it's insulated. I always thought that was the obvious way to go. All right. Let's talk about the big news of the day. So there's Politico is running a story that there is a leaked draft opinion that suggests that the Supreme Court will be ruling that abortion is no longer a protected right at the federal level, which some people say makes abortion illegal, but it's an indirect thing. Basically, it would bump it to the states, and about half the states are poised to make it illegal. So it would be half illegal in the country, half legal, some states. So that's what's happening. Now, here's the thing. Do you believe that this is the first ever leak by the Supreme Court? Does that sound, that would be amazing, right? So that's the story. The thing that makes it a big story, in part, not just the topic of it, which is huge, but in part that it's such a break with the core thing that keeps the country together, which is the Supreme Court, in my opinion. And it would be such a departure from the credibility they've enjoyed up until now, if in fact this leak is real. So, is it real? So CNN reported it this way, that Politico is reporting that they've confirmed it, but CNN has not. So CNN has not confirmed it. Has anyone else confirmed it? Just Politico? Here's my first question. Question number one. Has Politico ever run any stories as true that later turned out to be hoaxes? Have they ever covered anything that was a hoax as if it were true? Is that a thing? Or has Politico been one of the few that got everything right? What do you think? And if they got something wrong, I'm not saying they did. I'm no expert on what they have or have not said. But it seems that they have, maybe like everybody. I doubt there's any major publication that has not at one time in the last 6 years covered a major story as true, only to later find out it was a hoax. Probably all of them, I would think. Some more than others. So the first thing you need to know is that if something is like a remarkable claim, what's the Carl Sagan saying? Is not remarkable, but like incredible claims require incredible proof, sort of thing. How does he say it? Extraordinary. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. This would be an extraordinary claim, wouldn't it? Because it'd be the first time that the Supreme Court had a leak, and it happens to be the biggest topic of all time. I mean, I suppose that's what you would expect a leak to be about. But it'd be kind of remarkable if it's true. Kind of extraordinary, you might say. So one would expect that the quality of the evidence or proof of its existence would also be extraordinary. What do we have so far? A publication that is similar to other publications in that sometimes they get it right and sometimes they get it wrong. Now, that has to be considered. It's a 98-page document and is written with such detail that one would imagine it could not be easily faked. Sort of like the Steele dossier. So many things in there that even if a few of them were fake, wow, there's so much of it. Right? If you're going to do a hoax, that's how you do it. You wouldn't bother trying to do a hoax with the Cliff Notes. Right? So it's either a hoax done with great completeness, or it's not. Now, one possibility is that it's a real document, but it's not based on a real vote. That's actually possible. That the thing could be genuinely authored to be exactly what it looks like, but not yet based on a vote. It could have been written in anticipation of one. It could have been written to see what one would look like. If you voted this way, could you back it up? Could you make an argument that the country would read and say, some of the country would read and say, I hate this, but at least they backed it up. So I can tell you that I've written documents that were drafts that you wouldn't know they weren't real if you saw them. They were just me getting my thinking together. That's the thing. People who write arguments for things, I used to do this for a living, write business cases, argue that some money should be spent in a certain way. And if you do that, it's not unusual that you write a draft opinion, and then you look at it and you say, I thought this would be a stronger case, so maybe I won't go forward with this, right? So one possibility is it's a real document, but it's not connected to a real vote. Here are some things that should be considered. What would a hoax look like? Number one, we all expected a hoax, right? You've seen me say it. You've seen Greg Gutfeld say it. I think a number of people said it on social media at this point, that we expect, if history is our guide, we expect that the Democrats would come up with a new hoax that would be a big one. I mean, Russia collusion is such a big claim. It's so big that a candidate or a president colluded with Russia. That's such a big claim that you say to yourself, well, that couldn't be untrue. Nobody would make a claim that big. But it's also the size of the claim that's suspicious, isn't it? Because those are the ones that you can sell. Wasn't this Nazi propaganda? Not propaganda, but part of their technique was the bigger the lie, the more likely people will believe it. Small lies, people go, maybe, maybe not. But if it's a gigantic lie about a huge story that's just shocking, people will say, oh, that must be true. They couldn't say it unless it were true. So the size of it should be their first flag, right? That doesn't mean it's not true. But isn't the timing and the size of it kind of suspicious? Especially when it's exactly what we expected and exactly, well, about when we'd expect it, right? So if you were going to do a perfect hoax, you would first of all pick an emotional trigger. Why does that matter? Why does it matter that a hoax, if you were designing a hoax, why does it matter that it would have a strong emotional trigger? Because it will make you overlook the possibility it's a hoax. The stronger your emotional connection to it, the less likely you're going to be looking into the truth of it. You're just going to say, my God, something has to be done. And you're going to leap immediately into some kind of action, tweeting or complaining or something. But you're not going to be doing a lot of thinking. It just totally bypasses your thinking. So the abortion question is unique among questions. It's sort of like the Holocaust, and that the very mention of it just puts us on a 10 out of 10 in terms of emotional connection. Perfect hoax bypasses your rational faculties with an emotional trigger. It also is helpful if it's impossible to debunk. Do you know what would be impossible to debunk? Did the Russians really tell you that? Did that really happen in Russia years ago? Basically impossible to debunk. Now, I'll say impossible for hyperbole. Yeah, I suppose you could do it. But very difficult. Now, let me ask you this. Does the Supreme Court ever make statements about their inner workings under any condition? I feel like we would have heard something from them if they did. I feel as if it's their standard to never make a public statement. So if you were going to hide a hoax, the place to hide it is somewhere where somebody can't talk. If they did talk, you wouldn't believe them. Russia, right? So putting the Russia collusion hoax in a Russian, let's say, hidden box means you can't really confirm it or deny it. You put it into the Supreme Court inner workings, and what a coincidence. Isn't that a coincidence? It's the one kind of story that you can't confirm. Or maybe the Supreme Court will fool us and actually come out and say it's real or it's not. If it's real, could they say it? Not if they haven't voted. Am I wrong? If they haven't voted, I'm pretty sure they're not going to comment at all if there's any vote to be had. I don't even know what the case is. Is there even a case they're looking at, or can they just revisit things they've looked at in the past just because they want to? I mean, is there something wrong with the story that the ruling is not connected to a specific case, or at least the reporting doesn't connect it to a case? So he says the case was in February, and it was from Mississippi. Okay. Was that the one where the there was a girl or a woman gave herself an abortion. Is that the one? Because when I'm reading the headlines, there's somewhat of a disconnect. Now, is that just speculation? It could be speculation that those are connected, right? I guess it's all speculation at this point. All right. And here's the best part. A good hoax would still work after it's debunked. Because that's how everything works. The fake news still works after it's been debunked. Because the people who debunk it are not connected in any way to the people who need to see it debunked. The only people who ever see the debunk are the ones who didn't believe it was true in the first place. Right? So, have the Democrats seen the fine people hoax debunked? No, but pretty much every Republican has. Have they seen the drinking bleach hoax debunked? No, but pretty much every Republican has. Right? So debunking something doesn't really change its value. So some people said to me, but Scott, we will know for sure before Election Day whether this is true or not, because they would release any kind of rulings would be released before then. Does it matter? It won't. You say to yourself, of course it'll matter, because we'll know if it's fake news or real news by then. Nope. If it's fake news and we find out in July, it's already done everything it needed to do. Because people will have a trauma in their minds of what could happen if Republicans keep electing people or keep putting people on the Supreme Court. Right? So the psychological impact of it would be completely the same even if it gets debunked with complete certainty by the Supreme Court itself. Now, if the Supreme Court debunks it in a clean statement, this did not happen, or it was a draft and it's not connected to a vote, even if it was that clean, like, oh, God, that's true, it still wouldn't matter, because people's minds would have experienced it as true, and they wouldn't want to repeat it by having it actually true in the future, right? So you would create an impossibility for them to reverse it because they'd lived through the trauma of it once, and it was so bad that they're just super triggered now for anything that would actually be real. Now, the other thing, I didn't write it on the list because I was hastily preparing this, is that it's really on the nose, isn't it? What are the odds that the timing is perfect for the political cycle? It was exactly what we expected. Well, let's say we expected a large hoax, like a really large one, right around now. And here it is. Can't be confirmed. It's exactly the most emotional question that would get people to the polls and take all of the focus off the other things for which Biden is losing badly. It's a little too perfect. I'm sorry. It's a little too perfect. So, how long would it take us to know if it's true? Somebody says an actual leak would do the same damage. True. But keep in mind, there's never been an actual leak. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in the history of the Supreme Court, it's never happened. So the odds of this being the first one, on one hand, it would seem low if you compare it to history. On the other hand, there's nothing like Roe versus Wade and nothing like 2022 and nothing like the fake news of today. There's not, we're in a whole new situation. So yeah, I suppose if ever there were going to be a leak, you'd imagine it could happen now. But that's also what's too perfect, right? This is exactly the environment in which you imagine this could be the first time there would be a leak, and then it happens. Could be because we're all so smart, we saw it coming. Hey, this is the environment that would cause something like that. Or it's a little too on the nose. Somebody says, just read the opinion, it's not fake. That's how they get you. All right, let me state the criticism. The criticism is I think it's a 98-page opinion. It has the depth and credibility of a real opinion. So I think we can stipulate that. So I will stipulate that it has the look of an actual real opinion. And the experts who have looked at it so far appear to be on the same side, that it looks real. That doesn't mean it's based on a vote. That's the first thing. And it doesn't mean that you couldn't fake that. You could. Because first of all, I don't believe the justices write their own opinions, do they? Or do they have them drafted by their clerks and then they edit them? In other words, would you be able to run, here's a question for you, would you be able to run a writing analysis on it to know who the author was? The answer is yes. Yes, you could do a writing analysis on a 98-page opinion, and you would know with a high degree of certainty who wrote that damn thing. Now, if it's a mixture of writing, I think it would pick that up too. I think it would pick up parts of the clerks to the degree we know who the clerks are and we know their prior writings. I think we probably would. So if you could find the clerks and Alito's prior writing, and you could, and why Alito, right? Somebody says Alito probably has enough publicly written to have an AI write it. I doubt an AI could pull it off. You'd need somebody who is maybe experienced with that kind of writing, but also maybe was starting with an AI. Maybe the AI could give you the first draft, but I think the AI can't quite pull off a long-form hoax. I think an AI could fool you with a tweet, because it's short. I doubt it could pull off a long-form hoax yet, but it will be. And who knows? We could be well beyond the point where they can do it, and we wouldn't necessarily know it. You and I wouldn't know it. So here's my most likely opinion. Meaning, if I had to bet on it, which I wouldn't want to, because it's still fog of war, anything could be true. If I had to bet on it, I would say that the writing is real-ish, meaning that Alito's hand was part of it, but that it's not based on a vote. That's what I think. I think somebody may have leaked it. I think that's possible. But there are also other possibilities, which is it's just completely made up and just fed to Politico. All right. How many of you came into this live stream assuming this was definitely real and have now been convinced that there's at least a possibility it's not real? How many of you got your minds changed in the last 5 minutes? At least to the possibility that it's a hoax. We don't know. I mean, if I told you it's definitely a hoax, that would be going way too far. I would just say it fits perfectly the profile of a hoax. So one of the reasons that you watch this live stream is because I predict. And I predict things based on specific frames and techniques. So this particular prediction is based on the hoax identifier pattern, if I could make up a name for it. It's based on the fact that hoaxes look exactly like this. Doesn't mean it's a hoax. So let me be as clear as possible, because if it turns out to be true, then people are going to say, Adam said it was a hoax. How would I know? It would be literally insane or stupid to say that I know it's a hoax at this point. But just appreciate the fact that it hits every note for a hoax, every note, and it doesn't hit every note for real. How about that? It hits every note for a hoax, but it doesn't hit every note for real. There are a couple of notes that are off. One of the notes is the first ever leak? Right? The timing? How on the nose it is? Right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's like, it's sort of close to the nail, but the hoax one fits perfectly. there's nothing that isn't perfectly fit for the hoax. But for the reality, you've got to push things a little bit. You got to say, oh, okay, it's because the topic is so controversial. That's why it's the first ever leak. Totally possible. But you see how you have to nudge things a little bit to make that fit? It could be real. So let's keep that as a possibility. All right, here's what people are saying about it. Mike Cernovich says, this is a tweet from him, leaking a draft SCOTUS ruling is worse than January 6th. I don't know if it's worse than Watergate yet. We need to get somebody on that. But anyway, it's worse than January 6th. The court was the one institution where conservatives and liberals lived in peace and trust. You disagreed, but the trust was sacred. This completely destroys the court's inner workings, totally in shock right now. Now, I have to say that I think people who have a legal background, and Cernovich would be in that category, probably are more shocked than other people. So I'm a little less shocked, meaning that I don't think this destroys the court's credibility. Because we don't know if it's real, we don't know. And if this were leaked, that's really one person. It's unlikely that the justice leaked it, right? It's more likely it's a clerk or somebody who got a hold of it somehow. Scott is trying to set up to win either way. Shouldn't I? You say that like it's a bad thing. I'm trying to set things up so I win either way. You should take that as your role model, that's not something you criticize. You should say, damn, good job, Scott. Are you setting this up so you win either way? You should be impressed by that. That should not be something you're criticizing. I mean, if you did it, I'd be impressed. But I'm guessing from your comment you wouldn't be able to do such a thing. Just saying. All right. So I'm a little less shocked. I don't think it destroys the credibility of the court. If anything, it would be on one person, probably. And if that one person is identified, and let's say there's repercussions, then I would still be okay with the system. I would say, okay, you don't expect the system to be perfect, but you do want it to be self-correcting. And if it self-corrects, which seems highly likely, if this is a real leak, I would expect some self-correction, right? This would definitely affect the political cycle, but not as much as the actual ruling, right? So if this turns out to be true, then it doesn't have any political impact. Do you understand that? If it's true, there's no political impact because we would know the actual ruling well before the election. It's the actual ruling that would have the political impact. The rumor of it is foreshadowing, but it's the ruling that would be the problem, right? So, anyway. What else are people saying about this? Yeah, I guess the next thing I would want to know is what the Supreme Court's policy is on commenting. Because even if the Supreme Court has a policy on not commenting, you'd think that they would want to comment on this one. Am I right? You could disagree with this one, I think, pretty easily. That even if they had a long standard of never commenting, this might be the one they would comment. Now, here's how I would do it if I were them. You don't want to say a ruling is true or not true. Like, you don't want to say it was written or not written. But here's what you could say. To the best of our knowledge, there have been no leaks. Right? To the best of our knowledge, there have been no leaks. If they made that statement, would you say that that's sort of a break with the past? It would be. But it'd be kind of just a steady state statement. It would be the very unprovocative. To the best of our knowledge, there have been no leaks. Right? Or they could say, there's there's something bad that might have happened and we're looking into it. Right? But I think they could do those two things without destroying any precedent about commenting or anything like that. It's just such a unique case. I think people would understand if they had a unique reaction to it. I'm seeing in social media that people claiming that 70% of the country in some polls are in favor of abortion in some form. Does that sound true? 70%? And no, I'm not on mushrooms, but thanks for asking. Yeah, it doesn't sound true. Because I think the lower numbers are in the high 50s, right? Somewhere in the high 50s to 70%. So it's kind of convenient that the pro-abortion people are using the higher number, but you'd expect they would. Now, and you all understand that the Supreme Court does nothing but kick the decision to the individual states, right? So the individual states will probably stay about what they are, or at least they've already signaled which way they're going to go. So it's about half. So that there's this swath in the middle of the country from Texas up that's like solid anti-abortion, and then the two coasts are pro-abortion, and then there's this other sliver that goes north to south with some of the western states. So here's what I predicted long ago would happen. There will be apps that let you go from a state that doesn't allow it to a state that does allow it, and you'll be able to set up your whole transportation and everything, probably through volunteers. Because the biggest issue, if you had to go from a state that doesn't allow it to a state that does, would be the cost of transportation and the cost of housing. Because let's say you would have gotten the procedure no matter what state you were in. So that part's the same. So don't you think that there will spring up a underground railroad of volunteers who say, look, once a week I'll drive from Texas to the closest neighboring state where it's legal, and I'll take as many people in my minivan, and I won't even charge you because I believe in this cause or something. And you can stay at my house. I think it's going to happen. So I'm not sure that it will make that much difference in how many abortions happen. It might not. We may be surprised at how quickly things adapt, if in fact that case actually came down that way. So, did you know, or do you remember, that as we're looking at all this January 6th protest and / insurrection, alleged insurrection, that the Democrats protested quite vigorously when Trump got elected? Do you remember that? I didn't really remember that because it seemed like just business as usual. But Joel Pollack had a tweet with a video showing those protests. They were pretty vigorous protests saying that they didn't recognize the elected president. And there was even a commercial done by celebrities urging the electoral college folks to not vote for Trump, even though the votes were in that direction. So watching the level of hypocrisy in this is just makes your head explode. And of course, everybody can get away with it because the public is so underinformed. I would put myself in top 5% of well-informed people about the headlines, because I do this every day. So if I'm not in the top 5%, I'm certainly doing something wrong. But even in the top 5%, I'd kind of forgotten the Democrats also protested the legitimacy of Trump and tried to overturn it with their at least persuasion. There was no violence, and that was the difference. There were some folks who were violent, and of the many protesters on January 6th, but probably there were no actual violent people in the Democrats who were protesting, and that has to be different. But how many Democrats are we going to see surrounding the Supreme Court because of this leak? We've already seen it, right? It looks very insurrection-y. And it's going to be a trouble for the January 6th committee, who's trying to sell that as a big old insurrection if the news is just showing the Democrats doing it right now, surrounding a government building and acting threatening. Well, let me give you an update on my Dilbert comic that will get me canceled, Dave the Engineer. So this is day 2 of a week-long series in which I introduced the first regular character into the Dilbert universe, who will be a black engineer. Now, the running joke, is that the pointy-haired boss had orders from above to improve diversity, and so he hired Dave, thinking it would improve diversity, but Dave is thwarting him by identifying as white, and he can't be talked out of it. Now, later in the week, we will discover whether Dave is a prankster or he actually, that's the way he wants to identify. Now, what do you imagine would be the blowback I'm getting from introducing this new black character into Dilbert? Just take a guess. What do you think would be the complaint? And by the way, I guess it was banned in the New York Daily News and at least one major chain of multiple papers. So not every newspaper is running it. Racist? No, you're wrong. You're wrong. I thought that people were going to accuse me of being racist. They accused me of being anti-trans. Now, let me be clear. The comic doesn't touch on that topic in any way, directly or indirectly, or even by analogy. It's not an indirect reference to trans. It's not a direct reference. It didn't even remind me of trans. The first time I read it, I was like, well, are they talking about me? That's right. The biggest group of complainers are complaining that it's really a story about trans people identifying. But it's not. It's literally about people also, under our current rules of wokeness, do have the ability to identify as they please, both in terms of ethnicity, cultural identification, whatever, and as well as gender-related things. So how is this about trans? Now, other people had a separate complaint, and this was interesting. They said, why are you trying to get credit? Effectively, I'm paraphrasing. Why are you trying to get credit or act like this is wonderful when you haven't had a black character in the strip for 33 years? Why do you think that you're awesome because you're doing that? 33 years without a single black character in the main cast. And now you put one in after 33 years and you want a little credit. Do you know what my response to that was? This is the fucking reason I haven't done it for 33 years. Because somebody is going to try to cancel me for the wrong reason. In this case, it looks like the trans community is coming after me. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen a better friend to the LGBTQ community than me? I mean, seriously. I'm as pro-LGBTQ, pro-trans as you could possibly be. There's nobody on the left of me on that. Nobody. And still, that's probably why I'll get canceled. Do you know why I'll get canceled? Because I did a cartoon in which I tried to improve diversity exactly as people would like me to do. You can't fucking win. That's why. The reason there was never a black character is because not you, you're all awesome. I'll talk about the world. It's because the world sucks and they wouldn't let me do it. And I just proved it. I had to wait until I was so fuck you money down and close to retirement that I don't give a shit if I get canceled. I had to wait until it didn't matter. That's the only way I could do it. Because of the fucking critics. So don't complain to me and then ask me why I didn't already fucking do it. It's because you're fucking complaining to me. And you're asking newspapers not to run it. Is it theoretical? Is it fucking theoretical that newspapers will not run it? No, they're not fucking running it. Right now, they're not fucking running it. It's not theoretical. I can't introduce a black character with really harmless characteristics, completely harmless. His characteristic is he's playful. That's it. An actual positive attribute. And I can't even fucking get away with that. All right? So if all of you assholes, not you, the people watching this are kind of awesome, but if all the assholes complaining want to complain, you are the reason. You're the fucking problem. Let me be clear about that. The people who are complaining are the fucking problem. So fix yourself, and then everything else will be fine. Because I already want to put diversity in the cast. Why would I not want that? Now here's another reason that it was always hard to do it in the past, and you won't believe this one. This was weird. The newspapers don't all print in color during the week. A lot of them are still black and white. So the only way you know that this new character was actually black or intended to be by the author is that he was colored black. But a number of the papers are running it and he's white, just like all the other characters, because none of them have color. So for them, they're getting an entirely different comic in which it looks like a white guy was intended by the boss to identify as black, but he doesn't want to because he's white. It's a whole different comic. Now, what if I had done something to indicate that even in the black and white version, this character was black? What would that look like? Like, would I put like hashtag shading? And I don't ever do that on Ashok. You know, he's Indian, born in India, Indian American. And, you know, I don't cross-hatch him or put dots there to show his. Nobody cares about that. So my point is already made, so I don't have to say it again. Aren't you glad? All right. Dinesh D'Souza's provocative film is coming out really soon, I think. And I saw a tweet from somebody who saw it. And this was his characterization, and I'm sort of paraphrasing his characterization. So you should all go watch it, because I think it's going to be big news. In a few days, I think it's out. And so one person's characterization was it doesn't prove there was fraud in the election, but it makes such a strong case, and the individual evidence looks strong. And it also lays out a path which would allow one, let's say the government, to investigate whether or not these claims are true. So it shows you the base for which there is great suspicion, a lot of coincidences, and some actual people confessing. So apparently the film has people confessing that they did some stuff with mail-in ballots. But not enough of them, collectively, even if their confessions were real and their crimes were real, not enough of them to prove the extent of it that would change the election result. So the claim is that these individual cases are proven, or high credibility, let's say, and all you need to do is do more of them. You would just have to find more of these same people and get them also to confess, and you'd have your answer. Now, I don't know how hard it would be to get extra people, but the fun of this is that I guess D'Souza is laying out a pretty clean path for how you could know for sure, at least in terms of the mail-in ballots, and at least in terms of, I think, 5 states where something unexpected happened. We don't know if it was illegal, hasn't been proven, but something unexpected happened in terms of who won those areas. All right, Boris Johnson is looking to spin up a new nuclear power station in Great Britain once a year. Instead of a new one every decade, we're going to build one every year, says Boris Johnson. How in the world did this topic get so reversed in 1 year? Now, I guess it took climate change plus Russia to potentially turn off the gas to Europe. I guess it took all of that, and then suddenly nuclear is just wonderful, and it's just all positive, and let's build them as fast as we can. And it's almost like we forget that we were ever against it. We meaning, you don't even really see any anti-nuclear stuff on social media anymore. Think about that. Think about the fact that, I can tweet this now, And I don't know, 5 years ago, the comments would be full of, but what about the nuclear waste, which is a problem that's been solved for a long time? And there would be, what about the danger, which is a problem that's been solved for a long time? When I say solved, there's nothing that's zero risk, but, well within the reasonable range for everything. And I think people have actually been now educated, thanks to, again, Michael Schellenberger, Mark Schneider, and a lot of you. This is another perfect example of that power shift. I feel like this was smart people in the public, advocates, educating the public to the point where the politicians were then allowed to make this decision. So it made it safe. Basically, the public was informed enough that it made it safe to go this direction. And so they are. To their credit, they finally are. All right, here's a tweet that I tweeted that some people loved, and some people are still thinking about, and some people hated. And some people asked what kind of drugs I was on, because they wanted to take some too. All right, so listen to this tweet, and then I'll go over it. Right? So it's got a few parts. It starts this way. I said, space-time is a closed loop. Does it make sense that time is infinite and it has a beginning and an end? Does your brain, can you process that? Okay, how can time be infinite? Like, how could it have a beginning? Like, none of these things make sense. So I believe that space-time is looped or circular, meaning that we know that or we think we know, there was a big bang and the universe expanded, and that in theory, although I think there's some question about that lately, in theory it should eventually shrink back into the singularity and then maybe start over again with another big bang. So at the very least, it's repeated, we think. But I think a better way to see that was, like a Mobius strip or a cycle or a continuous loop, meaning that everything that has happened will happen again and has happened infinite times. Like, it's not so much that things happen, it's that there's a loop of all the possibilities. And you might experience them in a certain way, but they just sort of exist there. So that's the starting point. So space-time is a closed loop, and that means the internet happens every time. The internet doesn't maybe happen. History is a loop. It happens every time. So the internet happens every time, and God is waking up now. Always does. You might already feel it. It's a corrective force spreading out across multiple domains. Now, here's what I mean. The internet has connected humanity in a way that it was never connected before, and is giving us almost godlike powers. Do you think that Elon Musk could build a rocket ship to Mars without the internet, which allows him to connect to all the people he needs and all the resources and knowledge and everything? Probably not, at least not easily. So we're at a point where, take the pandemic. The world's response to the pandemic was certainly helped because the internet exists and everybody could talk, right? So we're forming some kind of higher level intelligence that is the sum of all our individual brains, sort of like a God. If we assume that God always existed and always will, then this model explains it. Because God would simply be in a different form. God would go through let's say, embryonic form, in which God is simply all of the stuff. It's just everything. And that everything has a few rules, and whatever those rules of physics are, would cause that thing to 100% of the time, because space-time is looped, 100% of the time an internet would form, and 100% of the time, this God consciousness, which is spread out into every bit of matter in the universe, would start to form a common intelligence, which is the sum of all our individual thoughts. And that if this were happening now, which is when you'd expect it to happen, because the internet is now mature enough that if this God intelligence were forming, we'd know about it. Because you'd see things that would look like a corrective force, a God force. And that God force would literally be the collective actions of all of us. And you could say, hey, God made us in his image. Or you could say, everything is God because all the material had to be here in just the right way for any of this to happen. So you could very easily get into the definition of what is God and very easily imagine that we're experiencing the birth of God right now, which still allows God to always have existed, just as everything always existed, everything including God. But let's say in this model, God is just all the matter. So what would it look like if the internet is causing this, let's say, higher consciousness that I'll call God to awaken? What would it look like? Well, I think you would see things look like a power shift. And take nuclear energy, for example. Whose idea was it to go from, I'm afraid of nuclear energy, to, in 1 year, let's do nuclear power as fast as we can? Well, you could say it was a combination of lots of people making lots of individual decisions, plus some events. Or you could say, God decided. Because when you add up all those individual decisions, none of them individually mattered, but collectively they formed an opinion, which is our new opinion. It is a new form of intelligence. It's an artificial, you could call it an artificial intelligence, but it's made up of organic things for a higher level of intelligence. That higher level of intelligence got the right answer, didn't it? It took a while, but when we were all thinking as individuals, we had the wrong result. As soon as the world started thinking collectively, and thank you to the disciples, the Schellenbergers, the Schneiders, the disciples. They basically spread the news around. The collective mind started working better. It started making one decision as, in a more comprehensive way. Considered climate change, considered, energy sources, considered pollution, considered the poor, considered desalinization, considered decarbonization of sucking it out of the atmosphere. So suddenly, because all of those things were all part of the nuclear decision, that humanity's brain just said, all right, let's go nuclear. That's not the only example. That is not the only example. I think you're seeing that the mind of the internet is becoming more important. Now, I've referred to this as the internet dads. That's simply another frame to look at it. You can see already the rise of the internet dads. And again, dad doesn't mean male or female, it's just an energy. The people who are just saying, I have this skill, I have the ability to communicate, I have social media, I have to do this. I have to be part of the brain. Now that's how I feel. I feel that because I have a certain set of skills, I have the Spider-Man problem. You know the Spider-Man problem? With great power comes great responsibility. I would love to just take a vacation. But when you have the ability to influence things, as I do, you've seen enough examples to know that's true. If you have the ability to influence things that are actually important, it's kind of hard not to. Because I think I'm just genetically biased through, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to need to help the tribe. Like the impulse to help the tribe is so strong, I can't turn it off. Like I get up every day and it energizes me. My entire motive for living, basically, is to help the tribe. Because I've already gotten most of what I need, right? I don't need to take care of myself so much anymore. So it's just sort of a natural transition. And I think that the internet dads, many of them are in that same position. They've taken care of themselves, and their natural next evolution is to take care of the tribe, and the natural way to do it is on the internet, to form opinions from bad ones to good ones, so that the unproductive opinions get squeezed down over time, and the internet dads form some kind of a cohesive way to live. How many of you have seen the internet dads, and I'll put myself in this category for this topic, tell you how to be successful in life? It's kind of what they do, right? All the ones who are like these dads, they all very directly, and I would say very usefully and very practically, tell you how to succeed. That's a very dad thing to do, right? It's also a mom thing, so remember, it's not a gender issue. Right? So when you see this group of people who are doing really nothing but trying to help, at least in this context, we're all helping ourselves. I'm not denying that. But clearly people are very oriented toward helping other people, and collectively, the dads all see each other. We all see each other, right? You know, I'm watching Jordan Peterson. I don't know for sure, but he responds to my tweets, probably has an eye on me, right? And anybody else you could mention in this group, we're probably keeping an eye on each other. We're sort of influenced by each other, and collectively, I think we end up shaping our messages in ways that make them more powerful as we notice what works and what doesn't. And that the power of the internet has moved into some kind of higher consciousness, some kind of higher level intelligence. And you can see that, and it's going to come about in a number of things. Now, let me give you one example. Suppose it turns out that this Supreme Court thing is a hoax. Aren't you glad I warned you? Or at least taught you how to spot the next one. It could be that this is just a whole bunch of coincidences. And so it looks like it hits every note of a hoax, but maybe it's not. But at the very least, you would learn how to spot one next time. So you're getting smarter, right? When you watch this live stream, and I would argue that if you follow Elon Musk, you get smarter. If you follow Cernovich, you get smarter. Jack Posobiec, you get smarter. There are some accounts, Glenn Greenwald, you follow his account, you just get smarter. Like when I read his stuff, I'm like, oh, you know, I almost always agree. Russell Brand, great example, right? When you follow Russell Brand, you just get smarter. Doc Anarchy, yeah. There are lots of examples now. Matt Taibbi, right. Mark Andreessen, perfect example. Andreessen has everything he wants. Jonathan Turley, another good example. Naval, perfect example, although he's quieter. You don't want to say Sam Harris? Oh, Sam Harris. Yeah, absolutely. I'll throw him in there. And Trump is sort of like the ultimate dad, isn't he? Although he's a little provocative, so he's got some expense. Yeah, Alex Jones, I think I'm just going to put in his own category, if you don't mind. Because there's not really like a second Alex Jones, is there? I feel like, the thing with him is, it's so hard to like his good parts, because the bad parts are like, I don't know, I don't agree with that opinion, or what he said, or what he did, or whatever. But I don't like to lose the fact that there's a whole bunch of talent and probably good intentions there. All right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, keep looking for that corrective force. Keep looking for that larger intelligence. I think the internet dads are only a part of it. So just to be clear, I'm not saying the internet dads are God. I'm saying that a larger mind is appearing, and that it will have lots of components just like your mind. Like your mind is a mess of competing opinions, right? So is this larger internet mind. But still, it all works. Like there's a competition in your mind, and then something comes out of it. Same with the internet. And the internet dads, that I call them, are one component, by no means the biggest part, but important. And I think they show the power of this model better than other examples, I guess. Why no internet moms? So it's not, again, it's not about the gender. So women can be an internet dad in this context. But the mom vibe is more protective, wouldn't you say? And the dad vibe is more kill it if you need to, walk it off, this is bullshit, this isn't. There's definitely a dad vibe. Is that too sexist? I'm open to an opinion on that. If you think that kind of framing, Barry Weiss, okay, throw Barry Weiss into the mix, and then you've got your female internet dad. I'll accept that contribution. All right. Tulsi Gabbard, okay, I'll give you that one. Megyn Kelly, somebody says. You just reminded me that she asked me to be on her show and I forgot to respond. I'm so busy lately. You have no idea. All right. Okay, now I feel embarrassed. I need to get back to her. I'm seeing other names. Some of the names that you're suggesting are more purely political. So let's take Candace Owens, for example. She plays a political role. That's sort of her job. So that's a different vibe. I'm looking for people who would, okay, I'm going to blow your mind here. I'm going to blow your mind. Representative Ilhan Omar. She's closer to an internet dad than Candace Owens. I'm not saying I prefer her or her opinions. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that Ilhan Omar is willing to buck the narrative of her own side, and there's several good examples. Glenn Greenwald did a tweet on this, and I wasn't aware of all the examples, and I can't remember them all. But there's several examples where Representative Omar very clearly bucked the Democrat narrative. Now, without getting into the details of any other policies that you love or hate and how she's offended you in many ways, I accept all that, right? I'm not going to argue any of those examples that you think are horrible whatevers. But, as Glenn Greenwald pointed out, when you see somebody who can do that, like they just have the capability, you should pay attention. Doesn't mean you have to agree with her. It just means she's not operating on the same code as other people. Now, if I saw Candace occasionally vehemently disagreeing with some, let's say, Trump-like policy, then I would bump her up as well into the, there's somebody who can break a narrative. But I think if you look at the people who are, let's say, 98% narrative compatible, then you don't know what they're thinking for sure because it's too close to the narrative. So I want to be careful about how I say this, because it could be, it's actually perfectly possible that there are lots of people whose actual opinions, genuinely held, are exactly the narrative. So since you can't tell, okay, are you agreeing with the narrative because you agree with the narrative, or are you doing it because that's where your money is, right? So we don't know what people think. We can only tell what they're doing. So if I watch somebody violate a narrative, then I know that about them. But I don't know what they're thinking exactly. I just know that they have the ability to do it. So all you're seeing is ability, not internal thoughts. Are you shaping the narrative? What do you think? How many of you think that I have impacted a narrative of anything important in politics? Let's put it up to the public vote. Because it's hard to measure that sort of thing. Because sometimes things go the way you want them to go, but that doesn't mean you have any impact. All right, so it's mostly, I think about 90% yeses here. Yeah, okay. So, yes. And And let me ask you this. Have you seen me violate the narrative? Anybody? Have you seen me violate the narrative? Yes. And do you know that it makes my audience smaller every time I do it? It does. I do it anyway. So if you see me operate against my financial interests, which I do openly, I am openly working against my own financial interests. At the same time, I'm monetizing this. It's all very obvious to me that every time I piss somebody off, they stop reading my comic. Right? Every time I violate a narrative, somebody will never read a Dilbert comic again. But nobody ever said, oh, I liked your opinion on this or that, so I'll start reading your comic that I've never read before, or buy your book. That doesn't happen so much. It's more like it is a one-way trip. People just take things away from you. So when you see me violate the narrative, you should know that I'm completely aware that's costing me money, but I think it's worth doing. Right? So take that into account. Do I know Kathy Geisweit? What a weird question. The creator of the Kathy comic? And the answer is, well, yeah, I do. The cartooning world isn't that big. So there are annual events in which most of the cartoonists get together. So most of the syndicated cartoonists have at least met each other. And by the way, she's awesome. Kathy Geisweit is. All right. I never hung out with Berkeley Breathed. I did meet him briefly. I believe he was deeply unimpressed when he met me. I met him at the height of his fame and at the beginning of my career. So he was a superstar, and I was the guy who wanted to be him. You're reading Way of the Weasel? That's my worst book. Sorry. I hate to tell you, that's my worst book. If you don't like that one, just read any other book I've read. Just anything else. So Dilbert and the Way of the Weasel, probably my weakest book. All right. So that's all for today. Probably one of the best live streams you've ever experienced. I know. Probably a little bit of a tingle going on. That'll last all day. And I'm going to say to you, I've never met Gary Larson or Bill Watterson. Both of them are famously reclusive. And I will talk to you tomorrow.